My name is Carmen Delgado, and I'm a 62-year-old widow living in the heart of San Antonio, Texas. For the past 8 years, since my beloved husband Miguel passed away, I've dedicated my life to caring for my family. My eldest son, Robert, is an architect who works long hours, and my youngest, Diego, is a commercial airline pilot who fulfills the dream he's had since he was 5 years old, when he used to build paper airplanes and launch them from our second-floor balcony. But what I'm about to tell you will shake everything I believed about my family to its core. It was a Tuesday morning in March, one of those days when the Texas sun filters through the kitchen curtains and makes everything feel peaceful and normal. My daughter-in-law, Sophia, was upstairs getting ready for her morning yoga class, something she'd started doing religiously every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months. I could hear the shower running as I finished washing the breakfast dishes, humming the same melody my mother used to sing when I was little. Sophia had been the perfect addition to our family when she married Roberto 5 years ago. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had this way of making everyone feel special. Her long black hair always smelled like jasmine, and she had this habit of touching people's arms when she spoke to them, making them feel like they were the most important person in the world. Roberto was head over heels, and honestly, so was I. Finally, my serious, work-obsessed son had found someone who could make him laugh. Their daughter, my granddaughter Isabella, had just turned 4 and was the absolute light of my life. That morning, she was at her preschool, probably finger painting or learning her ABCs. Sophia always made sure Isabella was dressed perfectly, her little outfits coordinated down to the tiny hair ribbons that matched her shoes. Everything about Sophia seemed effortless and perfect. I was putting away the last plate when the phone rang. The old rotary phone that Miguel had insisted on keeping, the one that sits on the kitchen counter next to the ceramic rooster, my sister brought me from Mexico. When I answered, Diego's familiar voice filled the line, though something in his tone immediately caught my attention. "Mom," he said, and I could hear airplane engines in the background. "I'm calling from Denver. We have a 2-hour layover before heading to Miami." "Me, Joe," I replied, drying my hands on the kitchen towel. "How was your flight? Did you eat something? You know how you get when you don't eat regularly." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Mom, you worry too much. Listen, I called because something really strange happened, and I need to ask you something." I settled into the wooden chair by the phone, the same chair where I used to help the boys with their homework when they were little. "What is it, me, Joe? You sound worried. Is Sophia at home right now?" The question struck me as odd. Of course she's here. She's upstairs taking a shower before her yoga class. Why are you asking? There was a long pause, so long that I thought we might have been disconnected. Finally, Diego's voice came back, but now it was different, more serious, almost whispered. "Mom, that's impossible. Sophia is sitting 3 rows in front of me on this airplane. She's been on this flight since we left Los Angeles 2 hours ago." I felt my heart skip a beat. "Diego, that can't be right. I just saw Sophia 20 minutes ago. She was having coffee at the kitchen table, reading that health magazine she always reads. She's wearing her blue robe, the one with the small flowers. Mom, I'm looking right at her. She's wearing a black dress and those gold earrings she wore to Roberto's birthday party. Her hair is up in that fancy bun she does for special occasions. Eileen's certain it's her." My hands started trembling. "Me, Joe, you must be mistaken. Maybe it's someone who looks like her. You know how sometimes people can look very similar from a distance." "No, Mom. I'm sure. When she boarded, I called out her name." She looked directly at me, seemed surprised for a second, then quickly looked away and hurried to her seat. "She's with some man I don't recognize, someone in an expensive suit. They've been talking very closely, like they know each other well." I gripped the phone receiver so tightly my knuckles turned white. Diego, this doesn't make sense. Sophia is right here in our house. I can still hear the water running upstairs. Just at that moment, as if summoned by our conversation, I heard Sophia's voice calling from upstairs. Carmen, was that the phone? Who's calling so early? It's just Diego Mija, I called back, my voice somehow managing to sound normal despite the chaos in my mind. He's calling from his layover. Tell him I said hello, and that he should visit us soon. Sophia's voice floated down the stairs, sweet and familiar. I turned back to the phone, whispering now. Diego, I just heard her voice. She's here. Mom, I'm telling you, she's on this airplane. I'm going to try to talk to her when we land in Miami. Something very strange is happening here. After I hung up the phone, I sat in that wooden chair for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. The kitchen suddenly felt different, as if the familiar walls were hiding secrets I'd never noticed. The ceramic rooster seemed to be staring at me accusingly. Even the morning sunlight looked different, casting shadows in corners that had always been bright. Sophia came downstairs a few minutes later, dressed in her usual yoga outfit, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked exactly as she always did, beautiful and put together, but now I found myself studying her face, looking for something, anything that might explain Diego's impossible claim. You look worried, Carmen, she said, touching my shoulder in that gentle way she always did. Is everything okay with Diego? Everything's fine, Mija. He just wanted to say hello. I watched her carefully as I spoke, but she seemed completely normal, completely herself. I'm heading to yoga class now. I'll be back around 11 to help with lunch preparations. Roberto said he might come home early today. She kissed my cheek and headed toward the door, stopping to check her appearance in the hallway mirror as she always did. After she left, I walked upstairs to her in Roberto's bedroom. I'm not proud of what I did next, but Diego's words had planted a seed of doubt that was growing rapidly in my mind. I looked around their room, searching for something, though I wasn't sure what. Everything looked normal. Sophia's nightgown was neatly folded on the chair. Her jewelry box was in its usual place on the dresser. Her passport was in the drawer where it always was. But as I held that passport in my hands, examining Sophia's smiling photo, Diego's words echoed in my mind. She's on this airplane. How could she be in two places at once? How could I have seen her, talked to her, heard her voice if she was thousands of miles away on a flight to Miami? I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, going through the motions of my daily routine, while my mind raced with questions that had no logical answers. When Sophia returned from yoga at exactly 11 o'clock, as she always did, she seemed perfectly normal. She helped me prepare lunch, chatted about her yoga instructor's new routine, and even mentioned planning a surprise for Roberto's upcoming promotion at work. But now, every gesture, every word, every smile seemed different to me. Was I looking at my daughter-in-law, the woman I'd grown to love like my own daughter, or was I looking at a stranger who somehow looked exactly like her? That afternoon, I decided to do something I'd never done before in all my years of marriage and motherhood. I started a notebook. Using an old composition book that Isabella had left behind after one of her visits, I began writing down everything I could remember about Sophia's behavior over the past few months. At first, it felt silly, like I was betraying the trust of someone I loved. But Diego's voice kept echoing in my mind, and I knew I needed to make sense of what was happening. As I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses perched on my nose, memories began flooding back with startling clarity. Things I had dismissed as quirks or mood changes now seemed significant. I wrote down dates, times, and details that had seemed unimportant at the time, but now formed a pattern that made my stomach turn. 3 weeks ago, Sophia had returned from what she said was a doctor's appointment. She seemed different that day, more distant, less affectionate with Isabella. When Roberto asked her about the appointment, she gave vague answers about routine checkups. But I remembered thinking it was strange because she scheduled the appointment on a Wednesday, and Sophia always scheduled her appointments on Mondays when Roberto could watch Isabella if needed. 2 weeks before that, I had noticed Sophia using her left hand to write a grocery list. When I mentioned it, she laughed and said she was trying to improve her penmanship by using her non-dominant hand. It seemed like a reasonable explanation at the time, but Sophia had always been naturally ambidextrous, something she'd mentioned when she first joined our family. Why would she need to practice with her left hand? Then there was the incident with Mrs. Rodriguez, our next-door neighbor. Mrs. Rodriguez had lived next to us for 15 years, and Sophia always greeted her warmly, often stopping to chat about their shared love of gardening. But last month, Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned to me that Sophia seemed different. She walked right past me without saying hello, Mrs. Rodriguez had said. When I called out to her, she looked at me like she didn't know me, then quickly said she was late and hurried away. I had made excuses for Sophia, saying she must have been preoccupied or stressed about something. But now, writing it down in black ink, it seemed like another piece of a puzzle I was afraid to complete. The more I wrote, the more details emerged from the corners of my memory. There was the day Sophia came home with a haircut that was completely different from her usual style. When Roberto complimented it, she seemed surprised, as if she'd forgotten she'd changed it. There was the evening she couldn't remember the name of Isabella's favorite bedtime story, the one she'd been reading to her for months. There was the morning she put salt in her coffee instead of sugar, then seemed confused about why it tasted wrong. Each incident by itself could be explained away. People have bad days, get distracted, and make mistakes. But together, they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. It was as if sometimes Sophia was herself, and sometimes she was someone else entirely, someone who looked exactly like her but didn't quite know how to be her. My hands were shaking as I wrote the final entry for that day, called Diego at 9:00 a.m. Claims Sophia is on an airplane to Miami. Sophia was in our house at the same time. Impossible unless... I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. The implications were too frightening to put into words. That evening, Roberto came home earlier than expected, just as Sophia had predicted. I watched them interact during dinner, studying their faces, their body language, their conversations. Sophia seemed completely normal, asking about Roberto's day, discussing plans for the weekend, and laughing at his jokes about his demanding boss. But now I found myself analyzing every gesture, every expression, looking for signs of deception. "You're quiet tonight, Mom," Roberto observed, serving himself more of the chicken mole I'd prepared. "Is everything okay?" "Just thinking about Diego," I replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. "He called this morning from his layover." "How is he?" "Still enjoying the pilot life?" Sophia asked, cutting Isabella's food into smaller pieces. Her movements were smooth and natural, exactly as they'd always been. "He's doing well. Busy with flights. He mentioned he saw someone who looked just like you on one of his planes today." I watched Sophia's face carefully as I spoke. She laughed, the same musical laugh that had charmed Roberto from their first date. "Really? I hope she was prettier than me. Did he get her number for one of his single pilot friends?" Roberto chuckled and squeezed Sophia's hand. "No one could be prettier than you, my amor." Sophia's reaction seemed genuine, natural, and completely without guilt or nervousness. If she was hiding something, she was an incredible actress. But something in her eyes just for a split second seemed different. A flicker of something I couldn't identify. After dinner, I helped Sophia give Isabella her bath while Roberto worked on some blueprints in his home office. This was one of our evening rituals, something we'd done together since Isabella was a baby. Sophia was gentle and patient, singing the same lullabies she'd always sung, using the same silly voices for Isabella's bath toys. But as I watched her interact with Isabella, I noticed something that made my heart skip. Sophia was using her right hand to wash Isabella's hair, but when she reached for the towel, she switched to her left hand without thinking about it. When she realized what she'd done, she quickly switched back to her right hand and gave me a nervous smile. "These old towels are so heavy," she said, but her explanation didn't make sense. The towels weren't heavy, and even if they were, why would that affect which hand she used? That night, after everyone was asleep, I called Diego. It was late, but I knew he was probably in a hotel room in Miami, and I needed to hear his voice, needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. "Mom? Is everything okay? It's past midnight there. Mijo, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw today. Every detail." Diego's voice became serious. I tried to approach her when we landed in Miami, but she and the man she was with disappeared quickly into the crowd. "Mom, I've been thinking about this all day. I'm certain it was Sophia, not someone who looked like her, but Sophia herself." "What did the man look like?" "Tall, well-dressed, expensive watch, probably in his 50s. They seemed very comfortable with each other, like they'd known each other for a long time. When they were talking on the plane, she was laughing and touching his arm the way she touches Roberto's arm." My heart sank. That gesture, the way Sophia touched people's arms when she spoke to them, was so distinctively hers. It wasn't something someone could easily imitate. "Diego, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think someone can be in two places at once?" There was a long pause. "Mom, you know that's impossible. But I also know what I saw. And I know Sophia was supposed to be at home with you. So either I'm losing my mind or something very strange is happening." "You're not losing your mind, Mijo. I've been noticing things too, things that don't make sense. I started writing them down today." "What kind of things?" I told him about the notebook, about all the small inconsistencies I'd been dismissing for months. As I spoke, I could hear Diego's breathing on the other end of the line, and I knew he was taking every word seriously. "Mom, I think you need to be very careful. If Sophia is hiding something, if she's not who she appears to be, then Roberto and Isabella could be in danger. You could be in danger too." "What are you suggesting, Diego?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the Sophia who lives with you isn't always the real Sophia. Maybe sometimes she's someone else, someone who looks exactly like her." The words hung in the air between us, impossible and terrifying. But as I sat in my dark kitchen looking at the notebook filled with my shaky handwriting, Diego's explanation was the only one that made sense of all the contradictions I'd been witnessing. "But who would do something like that? And why?" "I don't know, Mom. But I think you need to find out. For Roberto's sake, for Isabella's sake, and for your own peace of mind." After I hung up the phone, I sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling for the night. Upstairs, I could hear Roberto's gentle snoring and the soft whir of the ceiling fan in Isabella's room. These were the sounds of my family, the life I'd worked so hard to build and protect since Miguel's death. But now everything felt different, tainted by doubt and suspicion. If Diego was right, if the woman sleeping in Roberto's bed wasn't always Sophia, then who was she? What did she want? And most frighteningly, what was she capable of doing to the people I loved most in the world? The next morning, I woke up before dawn with a plan forming in my mind. If I was going to get to the bottom of this mystery, I needed to be strategic and careful. I couldn't confront Sophia directly without proof, and I couldn't involve Roberto until I was certain of what was happening. The last thing I wanted was to destroy my son's marriage based on suspicions that might be unfounded. I made coffee quietly, trying not to wake anyone, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. In the pale morning light filtering through the curtains, I wrote down a plan of action. First, I would pay closer attention to Sophia's daily routines, noting any inconsistencies. Second, I would discreetly ask neighbors and local shopkeepers if they'd noticed anything unusual about Sophia's behavior. Third, I would try to verify her whereabouts during times when Diego might be flying routes that would put him in contact with her. Sophia came downstairs at 7:30, exactly as she did every morning. She was wearing her favorite yellow sundress, the one Roberto had bought her for their anniversary. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her smile bright and genuine as she kissed my cheek and wished me good morning. "You're up early today, Carmen," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd made. "Did you sleep well?" "I woke up early and couldn't get back to sleep," I replied, watching her carefully. "Sometimes that happens when you get to be my age." She laughed and sat down across from me at the table. "Miguel used to say the same thing. He said getting older meant your body needed less sleep, but your mind needed more peace." The mention of my late husband's words startled me. Sophia had never met Miguel. He'd passed away 3 years before she and Roberto got married. I'd shared some of his sayings with her over the years, but I couldn't remember ever telling her that particular one. In fact, I wasn't even sure Miguel had ever said it. "When did I tell you Miguel said that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Sophia paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. For just a moment, she looked confused, almost panicked. Then she smiled and shrugged. "I don't remember exactly. You've shared so many of his wise sayings over the years. They all blend in my mind. But I knew I'd never told her that quote because Miguel had never said it. It was something I'd read in a book just last week and had thought sounded like something he might have said. Either Sophia was making an innocent mistake, or she was someone who didn't know Miguel's actual sayings and was improvising. "I need to run some errands this morning," Sophia announced, finishing her coffee. "Isabella's preschool called yesterday and said they need some supplies for their art project. I thought I'd pick those up and maybe do some grocery shopping." "What kind of supplies do they need?" I asked, pulling out my own notebook to write down the list. Again, Sophia looked momentarily confused. "Oh, the usual things. Construction paper, glue sticks, and markers." The teacher mentioned it in the note she sent home. I hadn't seen any notes from the teacher, and Sophia usually showed me all of Isabella's school communications. "Can I see the note?" I like to keep track of what Isabella is learning at school. "I think I left it in the car," Sophia replied quickly. "I'll show it to you when I get back." After Sophia left, I immediately called Isabella's preschool. Mrs. Patterson, the head teacher, answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Carmen Delgado, Isabella's grandmother. I wanted to follow up on the art supply list that Sophia picked up yesterday." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Delgado, but I'm not sure what you're referring to. We haven't sent home any requests for art supplies recently. Our monthly supply list won't go out until next week." My heart started racing. "Are you certain?" Sophia mentioned that the school called about supplies for an art project. "I'm positive. I handle all communications with parents, and we haven't made any such requests. Is everything all right?" I assured Mrs. Patterson that everything was fine and hung up the phone, but my hands were shaking as I wrote in my notebook, "Sophia lied about school supplies." No such request was made. An hour later, I walked to the corner market, where Sophia usually shopped for groceries. Mr. Gutierrez, the elderly owner, had known our family for years and always asked about Roberto and Isabella. Buenos dias, Mr. Gutierrez, I said as I entered the small store. How are you today? Very well, Mrs. Delgado. I just saw your daughter-in-law a little while ago. She seemed to be in quite a hurry. Really? Did she buy much? Mr. Gutierrez looked thoughtful. That's the strange thing. She came in, looked around for a few minutes, then left without buying anything. When I asked if I could help her find something, she seemed startled, like she didn't expect me to recognize her. Very unusual for Sophia. She's usually so friendly and talkative. I thanked Mr. Gutierrez and continued my walk through the neighborhood. At the pharmacy, Mrs. Chen told me a similar story. Sophia had come in, browsed the aisles, then left abruptly when Mrs. Chen greeted her by name. At the post office, the clerk said Sophia had stood in line for 10 minutes, then suddenly left without mailing anything. It was as if Sophia was going through the motions of running errands without actually knowing what errands she was supposed to be running. Or as if someone who looked like Sophia was trying to maintain her routine without understanding what that routine actually entailed. When Sophia returned home that afternoon, she was carrying shopping bags from stores I knew she hadn't visited, based on my conversations with the shopkeepers. When I asked her about the art supplies, she produced a bag of construction paper and markers, but they were the wrong brands and colors that Isabella's school typically requested. The teacher said these would work just fine, Sophia said when I pointed out the discrepancy. But her voice lacked its usual confidence, and she avoided making eye contact. That evening, during dinner, I decided to test my growing suspicions with a carefully planned conversation. Roberto, do you remember the anniversary dinner we had at La Hacienda last month? I asked, knowing full well that Roberto and Sophia had celebrated their anniversary at home with a quiet dinner I'd cooked. Roberto looked confused. Mom, we didn't go to La Hacienda for our anniversary. We stayed home, remember? Sophia wanted something intimate and quiet. I looked at Sophia, whose face had gone pale. She was staring at her plate, pushing food around with her fork without eating. Of course, I said quickly. I was thinking of someone else's anniversary. My memory isn't what it used to be. But Sophia's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Someone who had been present for Roberto's anniversary would have immediately corrected me or laughed about the confusion. Instead, Sophia had looked panicked, as if she wasn't sure which version of events was correct. After dinner, while Sophia was upstairs, bathing Isabella, Roberto approached me in the kitchen where I was washing dishes. Mom, is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately, and Sophia seems tense too. Did something happen between you two? I dried my hands on the kitchen towel, the same one I'd been using the morning Diego called, and looked at my son. Roberto had Miguel's kind eyes and gentle nature, but he also had his father's stubborn streak. If I told him about my suspicions without concrete proof, he'd either think I was losing my mind or he'd confront Sophia directly, potentially putting everyone in danger. Everything's fine, Mijo. I think I've just been worried about Diego flying so much. You know how mothers worry. Roberto hugged me, and I could smell his aftershave, the same brand Miguel used to wear. Diego is a good pilot, Mom. He's careful and experienced. You don't need to worry about him. If only he knew that Diego wasn't the one I was worried about. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep before calling Diego again. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting my call. Mom, what did you find out today? I told him about my conversations with the shopkeepers, about Sophia's lie concerning the school supplies, and about her strange reaction when I mentioned the wrong anniversary restaurant. It's like she's trying to be Sophia but doesn't quite know how, I whispered into the phone. She knows the basic things, but the details are wrong. Mom, I've been thinking about this all day. I checked the flight manifests for my routes over the past 6 months. There have been at least 8 flights where a passenger named Sofia Delgado was listed, always on days when she should have been at home with you and Roberto. My blood ran cold. 8 times? Maybe more. I only checked the flights I was working on. If she's been traveling under her own name on other airlines, there could be dozens of trips you don't know about. But Diego, if Sofia has been traveling, then who is the woman living in our house? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Mom, Diego finally said, his voice barely audible. I think we need to consider the possibility that there are 2 women who look exactly like Sofia. And I think one of them is living with Roberto while the other one lives a completely different life. The implications of what Diego was suggesting were so enormous that I felt dizzy. Twins? Sisters? Some kind of elaborate deception? And if that were true, which of the 2 was the real Sofia? The woman who had married Roberto, or the woman who was now sleeping upstairs in his bed? The following morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to me just a week earlier. I was going to follow Sofia, not just to the neighborhood shops this time, but wherever she went, however long it took. I needed to see with my own eyes what she was really doing during these mysterious errands. I prepared carefully, choosing clothes that would help me blend in, and packing a small bag with water, snacks, and my notebook. I felt like a character in one of those detective novels Isabella liked me to read to her, except this was my real life, my real family, and the stakes were higher than any fictional story. Sophia left the house at 9:15, carrying her usual purse and the canvas shopping bag she always used for groceries. I waited until she turned the corner, then began following at a safe distance. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid people on the street could hear it. Instead of heading toward the market district as she usually did, Sophia walked in the opposite direction, toward the more affluent part of town where the houses were larger and the gardens more elaborate. I had to be extra careful here, as there were fewer people on the sidewalks and a greater chance of being spotted. Sophia walked with purpose, as if she knew exactly where she was going. After about 20 minutes, she stopped in front of a beautiful 2-story house with a perfectly manicured lawn and a fountain in the front yard. The house was painted pale yellow with white trim, and there were expensive cars in the circular driveway. I hid behind a large oak tree across the street and watched as Sophia walked up to the front door. Instead of knocking, she took a key from her purse and let herself in, as if she belonged there. The casual way she entered the house suggested this wasn't her first visit. She knew where the key was, knew the layout, and moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the space. I stood behind that tree for over an hour, watching the house, trying to understand what I was seeing. Was Sophia having an affair? Was she involved in some kind of illegal activity? Or was there an even more disturbing explanation for her behavior? At 10:45, a black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway. A well-dressed man in his 50s got out, someone who matched Diego's description of the man he'd seen with Sophia on the airplane. The man walked to the front door with his own key and entered the house. 20 minutes later, I saw movement at one of the upstairs windows. 2 figures were silhouetted against the curtains, standing close together, clearly in an intimate embrace. My heart sank as I realized I was witnessing my daughter-in-law's affair. But then something happened that shook me to my core. At 11:30, Sophia emerged from the house, kissed the man goodbye on the front steps, and began walking back toward town. At the same time, I saw another figure at the upstairs window, a woman who looked identical to Sophia, watching from behind the curtains as Sophia walked away. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was hallucinating. But when I looked again, the woman in the window was still there, and Sophia was still walking down the street. Two women, identical in every way, in the same location at the same time. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against the oak tree for support. Everything Diego had said, all my growing suspicions, suddenly made terrible sense. There were two Sophias, and I had just witnessed them in the same place simultaneously. I followed Sophia, who had left the house, staying even farther back than before because my hands were shaking and I was afraid of making noise or drawing attention. She walked directly home, arriving at 11:50, just 10 minutes before she'd told me she would be back from her errands. When I entered the house 5 minutes later, Sophia was in the kitchen, unpacking grocery bags that seemed to contain exactly the items we needed. She greeted me cheerfully, asked about my morning walk, and began preparing lunch as if nothing unusual had happened. "Did you find everything you needed at the store?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil in my mind. "Most things," she replied, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. They were out of the good tomatoes, so I had to settle for these smaller ones. But they'll be fine for the salad. I looked at the tomatoes she was preparing. They were large, perfectly ripe, exactly the kind she claimed the store didn't have. Another small lie, another inconsistency in the growing mountain of evidence I was collecting. That afternoon, while Sophia was upstairs organizing Isabella's toys, I called the telephone company and asked for our phone records for the past 6 months. The representative told me the records would be mailed within a week, but she could give me some basic information over the phone if I needed it. "I'm looking for any long-distance calls made during daytime hours when I thought everyone was out of the house," I explained. After a few minutes of checking, the representative came back with disturbing news. There had been 17 long-distance calls made from our home phone during hours when Sophia claimed to be running errands or attending yoga classes. The calls were made to a number in Miami, each lasting between 20 and 45 minutes. Miami, the same city where Diego had seen Sophia with the mysterious man. I hung up the phone with trembling hands and immediately called Diego at the airport, where he was preparing for another flight. "Mijo, I need you to listen carefully, and I need you not to think I'm losing my mind. Mom, after everything we've discussed, nothing you tell me is going to surprise me." I told him about following Sophia to the house, about seeing her enter with her own key, about the man who matched his description, and most importantly, about seeing two identical women at the same time. Diego was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, what you're describing sounds impossible, but it's the only explanation that makes sense of everything we've witnessed. Identical twins, both involved in some kind of elaborate deception. But why, Diego? What could they possibly hope to gain?" "I don't know yet, but I think the answer might be in Miami. I'm flying there tomorrow morning. When I land, I'm going to try to track down that phone number and see what I can find out. Be careful, Mijo. If these women are capable of this kind of deception, they might be dangerous." That evening, during dinner, I decided to conduct another test. I had been thinking about it all afternoon, planning exactly what I would say and how I would watch for Sophia's reaction. "Roberto, do you remember when Sophia's sister called last month to wish her happy birthday?" I said, knowing perfectly well that Sophia had never mentioned having a sister and that her birthday wasn't for another 4 months. Roberto looked confused. "Mom, Sophia doesn't have a sister. She's an only child, remember? And her birthday isn't until July." I looked at Sophia, who had gone completely still, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Her face was pale, and I could see a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead despite the cool evening air. "Of course," I said quickly. "I was thinking of Mrs. Martinez from down the street. She's the one with the sister." But Sophia's reaction had been unmistakable. The mention of a sister had terrified her, which confirmed my growing suspicion that there were indeed two women involved in this deception. After dinner, I excused myself and went to my room, claiming I had a headache. In reality, I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to protect my family from whatever was happening. I sat on my bed looking at the family photos that covered my dresser. Roberto and Sophia are on their wedding day, both looking so happy and in love. Isabella's first birthday, with Sophia holding her gently while she blew out her candle. Christmas morning last year, the whole family opened presents under the tree Miguel and I had bought 20 years ago. Which Sophia was in these pictures? The one who had genuinely fallen in love with my son, or the one who was part of an elaborate scheme? And if there were two identical women, what had happened to the Sophia who had originally married Roberto? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Sophia's voice in the hallway, talking quietly on her cell phone. I crept to my door and pressed my ear against it, trying to make out what she was saying. Tomorrow afternoon. Yes, I understand. Make sure everything is ready. Can't keep doing this much longer. Getting suspicious. The conversation was brief, and I heard Sophia's footsteps moving toward the bedroom she shared with Roberto. I waited a few minutes, then carefully opened my door and tiptoed to the linen closet, which was positioned where I could see into their bedroom. Sophia was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at herself in the mirror with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't the face of the loving wife and mother I'd known for 5 years. It was cold, calculating, almost predatory. She was looking at her reflection as if she were studying it, practicing expressions, rehearsing how to be Sophia. Then she picked up a photograph from the nightstand, one of her and Roberto from their honeymoon. She studied it intently, as if she were memorizing the details, learning how to recreate the happiness and love captured in that moment. I retreated to my room, my heart racing. Whatever was happening, whoever this woman was, she was getting ready for something. The phone call, the way she'd studied her reflection, and the photograph, the mention of tomorrow afternoon, all suggested that some kind of plan was about to be executed. I knew I had to warn Roberto, but I also knew he wouldn't believe me without proof. And I was beginning to fear that by the time I could provide that proof, it might be too late. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound in the house. Around 3 in the morning, I heard Sophia's bedroom door open and her footsteps moving quietly down the stairs. I got up and looked out my window, watching as she left the house and disappeared into the darkness. She didn't return until just before dawn, slipping back into the house like a shadow. When she came downstairs for breakfast 2 hours later, she looked exactly as she always did, cheerful and loving and completely normal. But I had seen her true face in that mirror, and I knew that the woman making breakfast for my family was not who she pretended to be. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of urgency I couldn't shake. Diego's flight to Miami was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and I knew that whatever answers we were going to find, they would come from his investigation there. But I also felt like time was running out. Sophia's mysterious phone call, her late-night disappearance, and the way she'd studied her reflection, like she was preparing for a performance, all suggested that something significant was about to happen. I made breakfast quietly, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. When Sophia came downstairs, she seemed different again, more animated than usual, almost giddy with excitement about something she wasn't sharing. "It's such a beautiful morning," she said, looking out the kitchen window at the garden where Isabella's swing set sat under the old mesquite tree. "I think I'll take Isabella to the park after preschool today. Maybe we'll have a picnic lunch." This was unusual. Sophia typically brought Isabella straight home after school so she could help with household tasks and preparation for dinner. The park visits were usually weekend activities or special occasions. "That sounds lovely," I replied, pouring coffee into the cup Miguel had given me for our 20th anniversary. "Which park were you thinking of?" Sophia paused for just a moment too long. Oh, the usual one. You know, the one with the big playground and the duck pond. But there was no duck pond at the park where we usually took Isabella. The duck pond was at a completely different park across town, one we'd only visited once months ago. It was another small detail that revealed this woman's imperfect knowledge of Sophia's life. After Sophia left to take Isabella to school, I immediately called my friend Maria, who worked as a secretary at the police station. Maria and I had known each other since high school, and I trusted her discretion completely. Maria, I need a favor, and I need you to promise not to ask too many questions right now. Carmen, you're scaring me. What's wrong? I think someone in my family might be in danger, but I don't have enough proof yet to go to the police officially. Could you help me run a background check on someone? Maria was quiet for a moment. Carmen, you know I could get in trouble for this, but you've never asked me for anything like this before. You must be really worried. I gave her Sophia's full name, date of birth, and social security number, all information I'd gathered from various documents over the years. Maria promised to be discreet and to call me back as soon as she had any information. While I waited for Maria's call, I decided to take a closer look at Sophia's personal belongings. I knew it was a violation of her privacy, but given what I'd witnessed, I felt justified in trying to uncover the truth. In Sophia's dresser drawer, underneath her carefully folded lingerie, I found a small address book I'd never seen before. Most of the entries were local businesses and acquaintances I recognized, but 3 entries made my blood run cold. The first was simply labeled M with the Miami phone number. The second was C.T., with the same Miami number Diego had given me for the man on the airplane. The third was the most disturbing emergency contact, followed by a local phone number I didn't recognize. I copied all 3 numbers into my notebook and immediately called the local emergency contact number. A woman answered after several rings, her voice cautious and suspicious. Hello? Hi, I'm looking for information about Sofia Delgado. This number was listed as her emergency contact. The woman was quiet for a long moment. Who is this? Why are you asking about Sofia? I'm her mother-in-law. There's been a family emergency and I'm trying to reach her. Which Sofia are you talking about? Sofia Martinez or Sofia Rivera? My heart stopped. I'm sorry. What did you say? The woman seemed to realize she'd made a mistake. I think you have the wrong number. I don't know anyone named Sofia Delgado. She hung up before I could ask any more questions, but the damage was already done. The woman had mentioned 2 different Sofias, suggesting she knew there were multiple women using variations of the same name. My hands were shaking as I wrote down what I'd heard. Sofia Martinez. Sofia Rivera. Neither of these was the name of the woman who had married my son. Roberto's wife was Sofia Elena Delgado, N.E. Morales. But apparently there were other Sofias in this woman's network. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Maria calling back much sooner than I'd expected. Carmen, I found something very disturbing. You need to sit down. I gripped the phone receiver tightly. What did you find? The Sofia Delgado you asked me to research died in a car accident in El Paso 3 years ago. 6 months before she was supposed to marry your son. The kitchen started spinning around me. I had to sit down to keep from falling. That's impossible, Maria. Sofia has been married to Roberto for 5 years. I was at their wedding. Carmen, I'm looking at the death certificate right now. Sofia Elena Morales, the woman who was engaged to Roberto, died on March 15, 3 years ago. She was in a car with her twin sister, who survived the crash but was severely injured. Twin sister. The words echoed in my mind like a death knell. Maria, What was the twin sister's name? Isabella Morales. But Carmen, here's the really strange part. Isabella Morales disappeared from the hospital 2 weeks after the accident. The police assumed she'd suffered some kind of psychological breakdown and left to start over somewhere else. They never found her. Isabella, the same name as my granddaughter. This couldn't be a coincidence. Maria, I need you to find out everything you can about Isabella Morales. And please don't mention this to anyone else yet. I think my family is in danger. After I hung up the phone, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd learned. The woman living in my house, sleeping in my son's bed, raising what she thought was her daughter, wasn't Sophia at all. She was Isabella, Sophia's twin sister, who had been living Sophia's life since the real Sophia died in that car accident. But that raised even more disturbing questions. Did Roberto know? Was he part of this deception? Or was he as much a victim as the rest of us? And what about Isabella, my granddaughter? Was she really Roberto's biological daughter? Or was she part of some elaborate fraud? I was pulled from these dark thoughts by the sound of the front door opening. It was too early for Isabella to be home from school and too early for Roberto to be home from work. I listened carefully and heard footsteps moving quickly through the house, heading upstairs. I crept to the bottom of the stairs and listened. Someone was in Sophia's bedroom, moving things around, opening and closing drawers. The sounds were frantic, urgent, as if the person was looking for something specific. Gathering my courage, I climbed the stairs quietly, my heart pounding with each step. The bedroom door was partially open and I could see someone moving around inside. But it wasn't the Sophia I'd said goodbye to that morning. This woman was dressed differently, in an elegant black dress and heels, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo. She was packing a suitcase with expensive clothes I'd never seen before, items that definitely didn't belong to the Sophia who lived with us. As I watched, she picked up several framed photographs from the dresser, studied them for a moment, then placed them carefully in the suitcase. Then she turned toward the door, and I got a clear look at her face. It was Sophia, but not Sophia. The features were identical, but the expression was completely different. This woman looked sophisticated, confident, almost predatory. She moved with the assurance of someone who was used to getting what she wanted. Our eyes met through the crack in the door, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down my spine. "Hello, Carmen," she said, her voice identical to Sophia's but with a harder edge. "I think it's time we had a conversation." I wanted to run, to scream, to call for help, but my feet seemed rooted to the floor. This woman, whoever she was, held the key to all the mysteries that had been plaguing my family. And despite my fear, I needed answers. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped closer to the door, still smiling that terrifying smile. "I'm Sophia, of course. Or rather, I'm one of the Sophias. The question is, Carmen, how much do you really want to know about your perfect daughter-in-law?" I forced myself to step into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. If this woman were dangerous, running would only delay the inevitable confrontation. And if I was going to protect Roberto and Isabella, I needed to understand exactly what we were dealing with. "Sit down, Carmen," she said, gesturing to the chair by the window where Sophia usually sat to do her hair and makeup each morning. "You look pale." This must be quite a shock. I remained standing, gripping the doorknob behind me. "I know you're not Sophia. I know the real Sophia died in a car accident 3 years ago. You're Isabella, her twin sister." The woman's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Very good, Carmen. I underestimated you. Most people never look beyond the surface. especially when they want to believe something is true. She continued packing her suitcase with methodical precision. Yes, I'm Isabella Morales. And yes, my sister died in that crash. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Why would you do this to Roberto? To Isabella? To our family? Isabella paused in her packing and turned to face me fully. Do you really want to know the truth, Carmen? Because once I tell you, there's no going back to your comfortable illusions about your perfect little family. I nodded, even though every instinct was telling me to run. Sophia was weak, Isabella said, her voice hardening. She was content to marry your son and live this small, ordinary life in this small, ordinary house. She had no ambition, no vision for something greater. She picked up a jewelry box I'd never seen before and began transferring expensive pieces into her suitcase. I tried to convince her that she deserved better, that we both deserved better, but she was happy with mediocrity. So you decided to steal her life? I didn't steal anything, Isabella snapped. When Sophia died, I was in the hospital for weeks, recovering from my injuries. During that time, I realized I'd been given a gift, a chance to live the life Sophia was too afraid to claim for herself. I stared at her in horror. Roberto loved Sophia. He grieved for her. How could you let him believe his fiancée was still alive? Isabella's laugh was cold and bitter. Roberto never loved Sophia, Carmen. He loved the idea of Sophia, the fantasy of a perfect wife who would give him a perfect life. I simply became that fantasy. She held up a photograph of Roberto and Sophia from their engagement party. Your son fell in love with a face, a body, a convenient package. He never bothered to truly know who Sophia was as a person. That's not true. Roberto and Sophia were together for 2 years before they got engaged. He loved her mind, her kindness, her dreams for their future together. Did he? Isabella's voice was mocking. Then why was it so easy for me to take her place? Why didn't he notice that his beloved fiancée suddenly had different preferences, different opinions, different habits? Why didn't he question it when I told him I wanted to postpone the wedding for 6 months? The words hit me like physical blows. I remembered Roberto coming to me during that time, confused and hurt because Sophia seemed to be pulling away from him. He'd blamed himself, thinking he'd done something wrong, never suspecting that the woman he loved was dead and had been replaced by her twin sister. The wedding, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. You married Roberto 6 months later than planned because you needed time to learn how to be Sophia. Exactly. 6 months to study her letters, her photographs, to interview her friends and learn her mannerisms. It was quite an education. Isabella closed the jewelry box with a sharp click. But even with all that preparation, it was challenging at first. Sophia had such a pedestrian way of looking at life. Everything was about family and home and simple pleasures. It was suffocating. So you created another life for yourself, with the man in Miami. Isabella's expression shifted to one of genuine pleasure. Charles understands me in a way your son never could. He appreciates sophistication, ambition, and the finer things in life. With him, I can be who I really am, instead of playing the role of a suburban housewife. But you had Isabella with Roberto. You became a mother to his child. For the first time, Isabella's composure cracked slightly. That was unexpected. I hadn't planned on Roberto wanting children so quickly. But it worked out well, actually. Having a baby gave me an excuse for any changes in my behavior. Everyone expects new mothers to be different, emotional, unpredictable. I felt sick to my stomach. Isabella isn't even Roberto's daughter, is she? Isabella's silence was answer enough. Whose child is she? That's not important now, Isabella said, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. What matters is that Roberto believes she's his, and that's given me 5 years of security while I built my real life with Charles. 5 years of lies. 5 years of deception. How could you do this to an innocent man who loved you? Loved Sophia, Isabella corrected. Roberto never knew me well enough to love or hate me. I was just playing a role, giving him what he thought he wanted. She zipped up the suitcase with finality. But that phase of my life is ending. Charles has asked me to marry him, and I've decided to accept. The implications of her words crashed over me. You're leaving. You're going to abandon Roberto and Isabella just like that? I'm going to disappear, just like Sophia did when she died. Roberto will think I've had some kind of breakdown, left him for another man, something suitably dramatic. He'll recover eventually. Men always do. And what about Isabella? She's just a child. She loves you as her mother. For a moment, something that might have been regret flickered across Isabella's face. Isabella will adapt. Children are resilient. She'll be better off with a father who can give her his full attention instead of dividing it with a wife who was never really there. I realized with growing horror that Isabella had thought this through completely. She had planned every detail of her escape, considered every consequence, and decided that the collateral damage to my family was acceptable. There's something else, isn't there? I said, the pieces suddenly falling into place. The woman I've been living with, the one who's been caring for Isabella and helping with the housework. That's not you either. Isabella smiled that cold smile again. Very perceptive, Carmen. No, that's my cousin Elena. She's been helping me maintain the illusion when I needed to be with Charles. Elena is simpler than I am, more suited to domestic life. She actually enjoys playing house with Roberto and Isabella. So, there are 3 women involved in this deception. 3 women who look remarkably similar, yes. It's been quite convenient. Isabella picked up her suitcase and moved toward the door. But as I said, that arrangement is ending. Elena thinks she's been helping me save my marriage by covering for my absences. She has no idea about Charles or my plans to leave permanently. Where is she now? Picking up Isabella from school and taking her to the park, just as I told you she would this morning. She'll bring Isabella home, prepare dinner, help with bedtime, and never suspect that by tomorrow she'll be dealing with the fallout of my disappearance. I stepped in front of the door, blocking Isabella's exit. I won't let you do this. I won't let you destroy my son's life and disappear without consequences. Isabella's expression turned dangerous. Carmen, you've been very clever, but you're not thinking clearly about your situation. I know things about your family that could destroy more than just Roberto's marriage. Do you really want to force me to reveal them? What are you talking about? Your son's business, for instance. Do you think his architectural firm has been entirely honest about its building inspections? Do you think all of their permits and certifications are legitimate? Isabella's voice was silky with menace. I've been married to Roberto for 5 years, Carmen. I know where all the bodies are buried. I felt the blood drain from my face. Roberto's firm had been struggling financially for the past few years, taking on projects they might not normally accept, working with contractors who offered lower bids than their more established competitors. Roberto is an honest man. He would never compromise safety or break regulations. Perhaps not intentionally, but when a business is desperate for contracts, when the bills are piling up, and the future looks uncertain, sometimes corners get cut. Sometimes documents get signed without proper verification. Sometimes inspections get rushed or overlooked entirely. Isabella moved closer to me, her voice dropping to a whisper. I have copies of documents, Carmen, photographs of reports that were falsified, and records of bribes that were paid to speed up permits. If those documents were to find their way to the proper authorities, Roberto wouldn't just lose his business. He could face criminal charges. You're lying. Am I? Are you willing to gamble your son's freedom on that assumption? Isabella reached for the door handle. Step aside, Carmen. Let me leave quietly, and this all ends here. Try to expose me, and I'll take your entire family down with me. I stared at her, seeing for the first time the true depth of her manipulation and planning. She hadn't just stolen Sophia's identity. She'd spent 5 years gathering information and leverage she could use to protect herself if her deception was ever discovered. But as I looked into her cold, calculating eyes, I realized something she hadn't considered. In her arrogance, in her certainty that she could control every outcome, Isabella had made a critical error. She had underestimated a mother's love for her children. I stepped aside and let Isabella pass, but not because I was intimidated by her threats. As she walked down the stairs with her suitcase, I was already formulating a plan. Isabella had made the mistake that many manipulative people make. She assumed that, because she could control situations through fear and blackmail, everyone else was powerless against her. But she hadn't counted on the network of relationships I'd built over 62 years of life. She hadn't considered that a woman who had raised 2 sons, buried a husband, and held a family together through countless challenges might have resources she couldn't anticipate. After Isabella left, I immediately called Maria back at the police station. Maria, I need you to document everything we discussed earlier and prepare an official report. But first, I need you to do something else for me. I need you to check if there are any outstanding warrants or investigations involving Isabella Morales or anyone using variations of that name in Miami. Carmen, what's happening? You sound different. I'm done being scared, Maria. I'm done being manipulated. This woman has been living in my house, deceiving my son, and now she's threatening my family. It's time to fight back. Within an hour, Maria called back with information that confirmed my suspicions. Isabella Morales was wanted for questioning in Miami in connection with several confidence schemes targeting wealthy older men. Charles Thompson, the man Diego had seen her with, had filed a missing persons report for his wife, who had disappeared with several $100,000 from their joint accounts. Carmen, it looks like this woman is a professional con artist. She's been using her resemblance to her deceased sister to run multiple long-term scams. The Miami police have been looking for her for months. I wrote down all the details Maria gave me, feeling a mixture of vindication and rage. Isabella hadn't just destroyed one family, she'd been systematically destroying lives for years, using her beauty and her ability to become whatever men wanted her to be. But now I had ammunition to fight back with. And more importantly, I had a way to protect Roberto and little Isabella from the consequences of Isabella's threats. My next call was to Diego, who had just landed in Miami. Mijo, I need you to contact the Miami police immediately. Tell them you have information about Isabella Morales and Charles Thompson. I'm going to send you everything Maria found, along with the address of the house I followed her to yesterday. Mom, what happened? You sound like a different person. I am a different person, Diego. I'm a woman who's done playing games with someone who threatens my family. I gave Diego all the information I'd gathered, including the phone numbers from Sophia's address book and the details of my confrontation with Isabella. As I spoke, I felt a strength I hadn't experienced since Miguel's death, a sense of purpose and determination that reminded me why I'd always been the one family members turned to in times of crisis. After hanging up with Diego, I realized I had another problem to solve. Elena, the cousin who had been impersonating Sophia, was still out there with my granddaughter, unaware that Isabella had abandoned her to deal with the aftermath of this deception. I called the park, hoping to catch Elena before she brought Isabella home. The park ranger who answered knew our family and agreed to look for a woman matching Sophia's description with a 4-year-old girl. Mrs. Delgado, I see them by the duck pond. Do you want me to give her a message? The duck pond. Elena had taken Isabella to the correct park, the one with the duck pond that the real Sophia would have known about. This small detail told me something important. Elena genuinely cared about Isabella and was trying to give her a good day, unaware of the chaos that was about to engulf all of their lives. Please ask her to call me immediately. Tell her it's a family emergency. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The voice was Sophia's, but the tone was different from Isabella's confident coldness. This woman sounded worried, caring, genuinely concerned. Carmen, what's wrong? The ranger said there was a family emergency. Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I know who you are, I know about Isabella, and I know what's been happening. But right now, the most important thing is keeping little Isabella safe. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I don't understand what you're talking about, Elena said, but her voice was shaking. Isabella Morales told me everything before she left town this afternoon. She explained how you've been helping her by pretending to be Sophia when she needed to be elsewhere. She told me you thought you were helping save her marriage. Elena began crying softly. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Isabella told me Roberto was having an affair, that she needed time to go to counseling and try to save their marriage. She said if I could just help out occasionally, they might be able to work things out. My heart broke for this woman who had been manipulated just as thoroughly as the rest of us. Elena, Isabella lied to you about everything. Roberto never had an affair. She's been using you to cover for her own affair with a man in Miami. And now she's run away with him, leaving you to face the consequences. That can't be true. Isabella loves Roberto and little Isabella. She would never abandon them. Elena, Isabella isn't who you think she is. She's not even who I thought she was. But right now, we need to focus on protecting the people who matter. Can you bring Isabella home? We need to prepare for Roberto to learn the truth. An hour later, Elena arrived at the house, carrying my granddaughter, who was sleepy and content after her afternoon at the park. Seeing Elena up close, I was struck by how similar she looked to the woman I'd known as Sophia, yet how different she seemed. Where Isabella had been calculating and cold, Elena appeared gentle and genuinely caring. Where the Isabella I'd confronted had moved with predatory confidence, Elena seemed uncertain and frightened. Carmen, I need to tell you everything, Elena said, after we'd put Isabella down for a nap. I need you to understand that I never meant to hurt your family. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd received Diego's first disturbing phone call, and Elena told me her story. She was Isabella Morales' cousin, a single mother who had been struggling to make ends meet after her husband's death. When Isabella approached her with the story about Roberto's supposed affair and the need for occasional help maintaining her cover story, Elena had seen it as a way to earn money while helping save a marriage. Isabella paid me well for each day I spent here, Elena explained. And I genuinely enjoyed taking care of little Isabella and helping with the household tasks. It reminded me of the family life I'd lost when my husband died. How often did you substitute for Isabella? Maybe once or twice a month, usually for just a day or afternoon. Isabella would tell me Roberto was in counseling, or that she was attending therapy sessions to work on their marriage problems. I thought I was giving them space to heal. Elena, there were no counseling sessions. Isabella was in Miami with another man, planning to steal money and disappear. You weren't helping save a marriage. You were providing cover for a con artist. Elena broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. What's going to happen to little Isabella? She calls me Mama when I'm here. She trusts me. How can I explain to her that the woman she thinks is her mother has been lying about everything? I reached across the table and took Elena's hand. We're going to figure this out together. But first, we need to decide how to tell Roberto the truth. As if summoned by our conversation, we heard Roberto's key in the front door. He was home early, just as Sophia had predicted that morning, though for reasons none of us could have anticipated. Hello, he called out. Anyone home? I brought dinner from that Italian place Isabella loves. Elena and I looked at each other, both realizing that the moment of truth had arrived. Roberto was about to learn that his wife was dead, that the woman he'd been living with was an imposter, and that his daughter might not be his biological child. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of what I was about to do to my son's life. Roberto, I called out. We're in the kitchen. We need to talk. Roberto walked into the kitchen carrying a bag from Milano's, the Italian restaurant where he'd taken Sophia on their first date. His face was bright with the anticipation of surprising his family with dinner, but when he saw Elena sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face, his expression immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? Where's Sophia? Is Isabella okay? He set down the food and looked between Elena and me, confusion clouding his features. Who are you? He asked Elena directly. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would shatter everything Roberto believed about his life. Sit down, Mijo. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to understand, but I need you to listen to everything before you react. Roberto remained standing, his body tense with anxiety. Mom, you're scaring me. Where is Sophia? The woman you married, the woman you knew as Sophia, died in a car accident 3 years ago. 6 months before your wedding. The words came out in a rush, like ripping off a bandage. The woman you've been living with is her twin sister, Isabella, who has been impersonating Sophia since then. Roberto stared at me for a long moment, then began shaking his head slowly. That's impossible. That's completely impossible. I would know if my wife wasn't my wife. Elena spoke up, her voice barely audible. I'm Elena Morales, Isabella's cousin. I've been helping Isabella by pretending to be Sophia when she needed to be elsewhere. I thought I was helping save your marriage. Roberto looked at Elena, studying her face with growing horror. You look exactly like Sophia. Exactly like her. He turned back to me. Mom, this is insane. People don't just switch identities. This isn't some telenovela. I pulled out my notebook and began reading him the evidence I'd been collecting. Diego's phone calls, the inconsistencies in Sophia's behavior, the lies about errands and appointments, and the mysterious phone calls to Miami. With each detail, I watched Roberto's face grow paler. The school supplies, he said suddenly. Yesterday, Sophia said she needed to buy supplies for Isabella's class, but when I asked Isabella about the art project, she had no idea what I was talking about. Isabella Morales has been living a double life, I explained. She has a relationship with a wealthy man in Miami, and she's been using Elena here to maintain the illusion that she was home with you when she was actually traveling. Roberto sank into a chair, his head in his hands. How long have you known about this? I started suspecting something was wrong a few days ago when Diego called, but I didn't understand the full scope until today when I confronted Isabella directly. Where is she now? Elena and I exchanged glances. She left this afternoon with a suitcase. She said she was going to marry the man in Miami and disappear. Roberto was quiet for several minutes, processing what we'd told him. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a mixture of grief, rage, and disbelief. What about Isabella? My daughter? This was the question I'd been dreading. Roberto, I don't think Isabella is your biological daughter. The sound Roberto made was somewhere between a sob and a roar of anguish. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. No, no, that's not possible. Isabella is my daughter. She has my eyes, my laugh. She calls me Daddy. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Roberto, I'm so sorry, but I think you need to see this. The photograph showed Isabella Morales with a man I didn't recognize, holding a baby who was clearly my granddaughter. The man had Isabella's distinctive dark hair and facial structure. The photo was dated 2 months before Roberto and Isabella's wedding. Roberto stared at the photograph for a long time, his hands shaking. Who is this man? His name is Marco, Elena said quietly. He was Isabella's boyfriend before she decided to impersonate Sofia. When Isabella got pregnant, she convinced Marco that the baby wasn't his, that it was from a previous relationship. She told him she needed to give the baby up for adoption. But she didn't give her up for adoption. She used the baby to convince me that we should get married quickly, that we needed to provide a stable home for our unexpected child. Yes. Isabella saw your grief over Sofia's death as an opportunity. She could become Sofia, marry you, and have financial security while pursuing her real relationship with Charles in Miami. Roberto walked to the window and stared out at the garden where his daughter's swing set sat under the mesquite tree. Does Isabella know? Does my little girl know that I'm not really her father? She's 4 years old, Roberto. All she knows is that you love her, that you've been the only father she's ever known. In every way that matters, you are her father. But legally? What happens now? If Isabella disappears, if the authorities get involved, will they take Isabella away from me? I had been thinking about this question all afternoon. Elena, what can you tell us about Marco? Does he know where his daughter is? Elena shook her head. Marco moved to Mexico 2 years ago. As far as I know, he still believes the baby was given up for adoption. Isabella made sure there was no way for him to trace what really happened. And Isabella Morales had no legal right to make decisions about the baby's future, I added. She wasn't married to you when Isabella was born, was she? Roberto thought for a moment. No, we got married when Isabella was 3 months old. But Sofia, I mean, Isabella, she put my name on the birth certificate as the father. Then legally, you're Isabella's father. The birth certificate establishes paternity, and you've been supporting her and acting as her parent for 4 years. No court would remove a child from the only home she's ever known, especially when the biological father is unaware of her existence and the mother has abandoned her. Just then, we heard small footsteps on the stairs. Isabella was awake from her nap, and we could hear her calling for her mother. Mama? Mama, where are you? Roberto's face crumpled. How do I explain to her that her mother is gone? How do I tell a 4-year-old that the woman she loves isn't coming back? Elena stood up slowly. Maybe you don't have to. Not right away. We all looked at her. I know I have no right to suggest this, and I know it's asking too much after everything that's happened. But Isabella knows me. When I've taken care of her, she's been happy and comfortable. If you need time to figure out how to handle this situation, if you need help caring for her while you deal with the legal and emotional aftermath, I could stay. Roberto studied Elena's face. Why would you do that? You've already been deceived and manipulated by Isabella Morales. Why would you want to get more involved in this mess? Because I care about that little girl, and because I know what it's like to lose a parent suddenly. My daughter was about Isabella's age when her father died. I know how confusing and frightening it can be. Mama. Isabella's voice was getting closer. She would be downstairs any moment. Roberto made a decision. Elena, if you're willing to help us through this transition, I would be grateful. But I need you to understand that this arrangement would be temporary. Isabella needs stability and honesty in her life, not more deception. I understand completely. I just want to help her adjust to the changes gradually, in a way that won't traumatize her. Isabella appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes and looking around the kitchen. When she saw Elena, her face lit up. Mama, I had the best dream about the ducks at the park. Elena knelt and opened her arms, and Isabella ran to her for a hug. Over the little girl's head, Elena met Roberto's eyes. Hello, sweetheart. Did you have a good nap? Uh-huh. Are you making dinner? It smells like Italian food. Roberto managed to smile. I brought dinner home from Milano's. Would you like some spaghetti? With the little meatballs? With the little meatballs. As we prepared to sit down for what would be our first meal as this strange new family configuration, my phone rang. It was Diego, calling from Miami. Mom, the police here have arrested Isabella Morales and Charles Thompson. They found her with over $300,000 in cash and jewelry stolen from Charles's wife. But Mom, there's something else you need to know. What is it, Joe? Isabella Morales has been running this same scam in 3 different cities. She finds wealthy widowers or divorced men, becomes whatever they want her to be, gains access to their finances, then disappears. The police think she's been doing this for at least 7 years. I looked at Roberto, who was helping Isabella wash her hands before dinner, and felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that this dangerous woman was finally in custody, where she couldn't hurt anyone else. Heartbreak for my son, who had to live with the knowledge that his marriage had been built on lies from the very beginning. But as I watched Elena patiently help Isabella with her napkin, and as I saw Roberto's gentle smile as he served his daughter her favorite meal, I realized that sometimes the most important families are the ones we choose rather than the ones we're born into. Over the following weeks, our unconventional family began to find its rhythm. Elena moved into the guest room temporarily, and we established routines that would help Isabella adjust to the changes without overwhelming her with information she was too young to understand. Roberto threw himself into his work with an intensity that worried me. He would leave early in the morning and return late at night, spending his evenings reviewing legal documents and consulting with family attorneys about how to protect his parental right. The revelation about Isabella's true parentage had shaken him profoundly, but his love for his daughter never wavered. She's my child in every way that matters, he told me one evening as we watched Elena help Isabella with a puzzle in the living room. I was there for her first steps, her first words, her first day of preschool. I'm the one who comforted her when she had nightmares, who taught her to ride her tricycle. Marco may be her biological father, but I'm her dad. Elena proved to be a blessing we hadn't expected. Unlike the manipulative Isabella Morales, Elena was genuine in her affection for little Isabella and her desire to help our family heal. She had a natural warmth and patience that reminded me of Sophia's better moments, but without the underlying deception that had poisoned everything Isabella Morales touched. I know this situation is temporary, Elena said to me one afternoon as we prepared lunch together. But I want you to know that helping your family has helped me too. After my husband died, I felt so lost, so purposeless. Taking care of Isabella, being part of a family again, it's given me something to live for. I studied Elena's face as she spoke, looking for any signs of the calculating manipulation I'd learned to recognize in Isabella Morales. But Elena's emotions seemed genuine, her motivations transparent. She wasn't trying to replace Sophia or claim a permanent place in our family. She was simply a woman who had found meaning in caring for a child who needed stability during a difficult transition. 3 weeks after Isabella Morales's arrest, Diego came home for a visit. He'd been instrumental in helping the Miami police build their case against Isabella and Charles Thompson, providing testimony about seeing them together on flights and helping to establish the timeline of their criminal activities. She's facing charges in 3 states now, Diego told us over dinner: identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, child endangerment. The prosecutor in Miami thinks she'll get at least 15 years, probably more. What about the other families she hurt? Roberto asked. There were 4 other men over the past 7 years. All of them lost significant amounts of money, and 2 of them lost their homes. But they're working with prosecutors to recover what they can from the assets Isabella and Charles accumulated. Little Isabella, who was focused on cutting her chicken into tiny pieces, looked up at the mention of the other Isabella's name. Are you talking about my other mama? The one who went away? Roberto and Elena exchanged glances. We had decided to tell Isabella that her mama had to go away for work, that she wouldn't be coming back, but that Elena was going to help take care of her for a while. It was a simplified version of the truth, appropriate for a 4-year-old's understanding. Yes, sweetheart, Roberto said gently. We were just talking about how Elena is going to keep helping us, and how Uncle Diego is back to visit. I like Elena, Isabella announced. She makes pancakes shaped like butterflies. After Isabella was in bed, Diego, Roberto, Elena, and I sat in the living room discussing the future. The immediate crisis had passed, but we all knew that our family would never be the same as it was before. I've been thinking about making some changes, Roberto said, his voice thoughtful. My architectural firm has been struggling, and after everything that's happened, I realize I want to focus more on being present for Isabella. I've been offered a position with a larger firm that would mean more regular hours and less financial stress. That sounds like a good opportunity, Mijo, I said. Your family should always come first. There's something else, Roberto continued. I've been talking to Elena about the possibility of her staying permanently. Not as Isabella's replacement mother, but as a nanny and household helper. Isabella is comfortable with her, and Elena needs stability too. Elena looked surprised. Roberto, I told you I understand this is temporary. I don't want you to feel obligated to provide for me just because I help during a crisis. It's not an obligation, Elena. It's recognition that you've been good for Isabella and good for our family. If you're willing to stay, we'd like you to consider making this arrangement permanent. I watched Elena's face as she processed Roberto's offer. Unlike Isabella Morales, who had calculated every angle and manipulated every situation to her advantage, Elena seemed genuinely touched and uncertain about accepting such generosity. I would need to contribute more than just childcare, Elena said finally. I have skills beyond taking care of children. I was an accountant before my husband died. Maybe I could help with the household finances, or even with your business accounting if you need assistance. Roberto smiled for the first time in weeks. That sounds perfect. I've never been good with numbers anyway. As the conversation continued, I found myself thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought us to this point. Isabella Morales's deception had nearly destroyed our family, but it had also brought Elena into our lives. A woman who had been grieving the loss of her own family had found a new purpose in helping to rebuild ours. The next morning, I was watering my daisies in the garden when Mrs. Rodriguez came over to chat, as she often did. Carmen, I have to say, your daughter-in-law seems so much happier lately. More relaxed, more genuine. Whatever problems she was having seemed to have resolved themselves. I smiled, knowing that Mrs. Rodriguez was seeing the difference between the manipulative Isabella Morales and the genuine Elena, but not understanding the full story. Sometimes people just need time to find their true selves, I replied, which was true enough without being deceptive. And little Isabella seems to be thriving. She was in the yard yesterday, teaching Elena how to make flower crowns. It was the sweetest thing. After Mrs. Rodriguez went back to her house, I continued tending my garden, thinking about the conversation. One of the unexpected gifts of this entire ordeal was that I had learned to trust my instincts again. The small inconsistencies that had bothered me about Isabella Morales, the feeling that something was wrong even when I couldn't articulate what it was, had been valid concerns that ultimately helped save my family. I had also learned that families can be rebuilt in unexpected ways. Roberto, Elena, little Isabella, Diego, and I weren't the family we'd been 6 months ago, but we were becoming something new, something perhaps stronger and more honest than what we'd had before. That afternoon, Elena came to find me in the garden, where I was planting new bulbs for next spring's flowers. "Carmen, I wanted to talk to you about something. I know Roberto has offered me a permanent position here, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. But I need to know that you're comfortable with me being part of your family long term." I set down my trowel and looked at this young woman who had been through her own losses and deceptions, yet had responded with kindness and generosity rather than bitterness. "Elena, when Isabella Morales was living in my house, I always felt like something was missing, something not quite right. With you, I feel like our family is finally complete in a way it never was before." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I promise I'll never deceive you the way she did. I'll never pretend to be someone I'm not." "I know you won't, Maija. You've already proven that you're exactly who you appear to be." As we worked together in the garden that afternoon, Elena helping me plant bulbs that would bloom long after the chaos of the past months had faded into memory, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. I had learned that love and trust, once broken, can be rebuilt on firmer foundations. I had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst disasters. And I had learned that a family's strength isn't measured by its perfection, but by its ability to survive challenges and emerge stronger. Most importantly, I had learned that a mother's instincts, honed by years of protecting and nurturing her children, should never be ignored. When something feels wrong, it probably is. And when something feels right, as Elena's presence in our family did, it's worth fighting to preserve. 6 months later, I sat in the same kitchen chair where I had first received Diego's impossible phone call, but everything had changed. The morning sunlight streaming through the curtains illuminated a scene of domestic tranquility that felt both familiar and entirely new. Elena was at the stove making breakfast, her movements efficient and graceful, as she prepared scrambled eggs the way little Isabella liked them. Roberto sat at the table reviewing architectural plans while simultaneously helping Isabella practice writing her letters in a notebook covered with butterfly stickers. "Grandma Carmen," Isabella said, holding up her pencil with pride, "look how good Maya is getting." I examined her careful work, noting how her handwriting was becoming more confident each day. "That's beautiful, Maya Moore. You're becoming such a good writer." The scene was peaceful and normal, but I never forgot the lessons of the past year. I had learned to appreciate the genuine moments while remaining alert to any signs that things might not be as they appeared. The difference was that now my vigilance came from wisdom rather than fear. Elena had indeed become a permanent part of our family, and the arrangement had worked better than any of us had dared to hope. She managed the household finances with the same attention to detail she brought to caring for Isabella, and she had helped Roberto's business become more stable and profitable. More importantly, she had given little Isabella the consistency and affection she needed during a time of tremendous upheaval. Roberto had grown into his role as a single father with Elena's support. The revelation that Isabella might not be his biological daughter had initially devastated him, but over time it had freed him to love her without the weight of deception and manipulation that had shadowed their relationship before. He was more present, more engaged, and more confident in his parenting decisions. "I have some news," Diego announced as he came downstairs, already dressed in his pilot's uniform for an early flight. "The Miami prosecutor called yesterday. Isabella Morales' sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. They're expecting her to receive 22 years. Roberto looked up from Isabella's writing practice. "Will they need any of us to testify?" "No, they have enough evidence from the financial crimes and the testimony from her other victims." "But Roberto, there is something else you should know." The prosecutor mentioned that Isabella Morales has been trying to make a deal. She's offering information about other criminal networks in exchange for a reduced sentence. Elena paused in her cooking. "What kind of information?" Apparently, she wasn't working alone. There's a whole network of people who specialize in identity theft and long-term fraud schemes. The authorities think they've been operating across multiple states for decades. I shuddered to think how many other families had been destroyed by people like Isabella Morales. How many children had grown up not knowing their true parentage. How many men and women had been deceived by those they thought they loved. "I'm glad she's cooperating with the authorities," I said. "Maybe some good can come from all the pain she caused." After Diego left for the airport and Roberto departed for work, Elena and I settled into our daily routine of preparing for Isabella's day at preschool. The little girl had adjusted remarkably well to the changes in her life, though she still occasionally asked when her other mama would come back. "Elena is my everyday mama," Isabella had told her teacher, according to the progress report we'd received the week before. "And my other mama went away to work far away and can't come back. But that's okay because Elena makes better pancakes." As I helped Isabella put on her shoes, I marveled at children's resilience. Adults often underestimate how much children understand and how well they can adapt to new circumstances when they feel loved and secure. "Grandma Carmen," Isabella said as we walked to the car, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Before Elena came to stay with us, you seemed worried all the time. Now you smile more." I knelt to Isabella's level, struck by her perceptiveness. "You're very observant, my amor. I am happier now." Sometimes adults worry about things, but when families work together and take care of each other, those worries go away. "Like when I have bad dreams and you come to sing to me?" Exactly like that. After dropping Isabella at preschool, Elena and I went to the grocery store together, something that had become one of our weekly traditions. As we walked through the familiar aisles, I reflected on how different these shopping trips felt compared to the anxiety-filled days when I had been following Sophia, trying to understand her mysterious behavior. "Carmen, I've been thinking about something," Elena said as we selected produce. "I know we've never talked about this directly, but I want you to know that I understand my role in this family. I'm not trying to replace Sophia or become something I'm not. I'm just trying to be the best version of myself for Roberto and Isabella." I put down the tomatoes I'd been examining and looked at Elena directly. "Mija, you don't need to worry about replacing anyone. Sophia is gone, and the woman we thought was Sophia was never really here at all. You're not a replacement or a substitute. You're yourself, and that's exactly what this family needs." When we returned home, I found a letter in the mailbox that made my hands tremble. It was from the Women's Correctional Facility in Miami, addressed to me personally. With Elena reading over my shoulder, I opened it carefully. The letter was from Isabella Morales. "Mrs. Delgado," it began, "I know you have no reason to read this letter, and even less reason to believe anything I say. But I wanted you to know that in all my years of deception and manipulation, living with your family was the closest I ever came to understanding what genuine love looked like. You protected Roberto and Isabella, even when you didn't fully understand what you were protecting them from. That kind of maternal instinct and courage is something I never experienced in my own childhood. The letter continued for several pages, but I stopped reading. Whatever Isabella Morales had to say about her motivations or her regrets, it wouldn't change what she had done to my family. Some apologies come too late and cost too much to mean anything. I folded the letter and put it in the kitchen drawer where I kept important documents. Someday, when Isabella was older, she might want to know what her biological mother had to say. But for now, it would remain unread, a relic of a painful chapter that we had moved beyond. That evening, our unconventional family gathered around the dinner table as we did every night. Roberto shared stories from his workday. Elena helped Isabella practice using her fork properly, and I watched it all with the satisfaction of someone who had fought for something precious and won. As we cleared the dishes, Roberto pulled me aside. "Mom, I want to thank you for everything you did. If you hadn't trusted your instincts, if you hadn't been brave enough to investigate when something felt wrong, Isabella Morales might have continued her deception for years. She might have taken everything from us and disappeared, leaving Isabella without any family at all. We protected each other, Mijo. That's what families do. But you could have ignored your suspicions. You could have convinced yourself that everything was fine and avoided all the pain of discovering the truth." I considered this as I dried the dishes Elena handed me. "Roberto, I learned something important during those terrible months. The truth may be painful, but lies are always more dangerous. Isabella Morales was like a cancer in our family. If we hadn't exposed her deception and removed her influence, she would have eventually destroyed everything we cared about." Later that night, after everyone else was asleep, I sat on the front porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the neighborhood where I had lived for so many years. The houses were dark, their occupants safely settled for the night, trusting that tomorrow would bring familiar routines and predictable challenges. I thought about all the families living behind those darkened windows, and I wondered how many of them might be harboring secrets they weren't even aware of. How many mothers had instincts they were ignoring? How many fathers were living with people they didn't truly know? How many children were growing up in situations that looked normal on the surface, but were built on foundations of deception? My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Diego, calling from a hotel room in Denver. "Mom, I just wanted to check on everyone before I went to sleep. How was your day?" "It was a good day, Mijo. A normal, peaceful, honest day." "Those are the best kind," Diego said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. After we hung up, I remained on the porch for a few more minutes, savoring the quiet contentment that had replaced the anxiety and fear that had consumed me during the worst of Isabella Morales's deception.